You are listening to the Logos broadcast with Fergus James Murphy. Victoria White is a freelance writer with a regular column for the Irish Examiner and the Herald. She spent much of her career at the Irish Times, working on the arts desk and for a time as that paper's arts editor. Nowadays, Victoria describes herself as an environmental activist who wants to green the face of feminism. She is a mother of 4 children, and this is evident in her writing and activism. I got a bit of a shock with her answer to my first question, and I hope you enjoyed the lively start to this discussion. You are listening to the Logos broadcast with Fergus James Murphy. Tell me about your own family upbringing in the Protestant tradition in Ireland.
I find that very interesting that you say all of that.
Well, so yeah, I'm paying too much attention to it.
Yes, you are. I'm going to interrogate your question.
Okay.
So why do you assume that I was brought up in the Protestant tradition?
Because I was in a choir at the bottom of the driveway of my school in a Protestant church.
Church of Ireland.
Should I not
Church
call
of
it
Ireland
Protestant
church? No.
Okay,
Church
of Ireland.
Yeah, and I was in the choir.
And you were in the adult section of the choir, and I was in the young section. I sang a few times. I don't know if you ever sang together.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I remember I used to speak to your son, with whom I'm very friendly, about, I suppose, the fact that you were of the Church of Ireland. But am I wrong to...
Well, you see,
to apply that label, or is that a misunderstanding?
Yes, because, okay...
Well, you were born into that kind of family, weren't you?
Not really. I mean, what is that kind of family? So I'm going to now tell you...
A family that goes, for example...
They didn't.
Okay, but that would have been my wrong assumption.
Yes,
then.
You see. So the point is, I think this is actually quite interesting, because it's to do with, our need to... the broad brush strokes with which... And so basically what you're drawing there is some sort of counterpoint to mainstream Catholic culture.
Exactly.
And of course, I am not that person that you're trying to draw. And the interesting thing about how we look back at history is how we never credit people with their own impulses. So, the thing is that, for instance, when people hear my name Victoria, people think that has something to do with Queen Victoria, and they look back, and I mean, my parents were nationalists, and my name, I was called after Michelangelo's girlfriend. Sadly, my parents didn't know he had no girlfriends, but anyway. So, because they were Italophiles, and my parents were atheists.
Okay.
So, but
didn't you go to St. Andrews?
Yes, but I mean, does that mean that that's a Presbyterian school for a start? But no, what I did was I went to... My parents came from different Protestant traditions.
Okay.
So my father's family were Congregationalists from Cork.
Okay.
And actually his parents were English. So they were low church. My grandfather, they were working class. They came... Apparently my grandfather emigrated to Cork because he couldn't proceed in the accountancy profession as a working class boy in England. So and apparently, this is all mythology, it's probably not true, but anyway, apparently he was teaching chartered accountants, but he couldn't become one because he was working class. So he came to Cork, where this was all brushed away, because actually, once you were Protestant in Cork, you already had a standing, and so he joined a Protestant accountancy firm, a very broad-minded one. And interestingly, that would have been just before the burning of Cork and the whole where every Protestant's meant to blah, 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 blah. Well, himself and my grandmother were both English, and they both stayed. Obviously, Cork is now again, and was then, a very dynamic place. Maybe, there was more that they wanted to leave behind. For instance, that my granny was illegitimate and quote unquote.
Yes.
Then that they didn't feel. So then again, there's the kind of simplistic prism. How would an English couple have felt in Cork in 1922, during the War of Independence? Well, but then again, my granny hated Ireland, and we always thought how stupid she was, and you kind of think,
But
you forgot that Cork was burnt, and that their accountancy office would have been nearly burnt. But what I'm saying is that they got along quite happily, thank you.
In Ireland?
Yes.
And they weren't they didn't stick out like a sore thumb, like I might...
Oh no, but I mean, Cork was...
try to imagine, is that basically what
no, I mean, Cork would have been at the time at least a fifth Protestant.
Okay.
I mean, it would have been very, very there would be huge Protestant community. I know, I mean, that did disappear. I mean, that did disappear after independence. But, so anyway, they were Congregationalist, so they wouldn't again have been, I mean, they might have been targets within the War of Independence, except that they had no military connections. Interestingly, I think perhaps my grandfather may have been draft dodging when he came to Ireland.
Really?
Yeah, or the Congregationalists may have been quite pacifist. I know they were abolitionist. So, I mean, my culture there on that side, which I did very strongly take, is very low church Protestant. And so...
what's high church?
Is Anglican, which basically is Anglo-Catholic. Okay. So,
like Catholic light. I've heard people say that.
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, no, but basically, the story is, I mean, Henry VIII, decided to have his own version of the Catholic Church because he wanted to marry Anne Boleyn. I mean, and so ultimately the Church of Ireland and the Church of England were really instruments of monarchic control to a large degree. And state control. And then, I mean, the Low Church. So then, okay, that's my father's family. And then my mother's family. Yes, there was one Church of Ireland member of my mother's family. My granny was Presbyterian and was planter. They'd been in the same place in Donegal for like 400 years, and also Huguenot. So that's all Low Church.
Okay.
And again, a mother's influence on a house on a very, very strong. But my grandfather was Church of Ireland, and he would have been probably turncoat. He would be probably native Irish turncoat. Fascinatingly, they were from a place called Ballinderry on the shores of Lough Neagh, and at a certain point, half of the McGuckans, some of the McGuckans stayed Catholic, some of them stayed Protestant. And I mean, of course, if you, at that point, in the 1600s, if you converted, you got to inherit the land. I can't believe that they stayed living there.
Okay.
They're still living there. McGuckans are still in Ballinderry. And there was some
What
there...
county is that in?
County Antrim.
Okay.
Some of them are very high up in the Catholic Church, and some of them, and one of them was a Grand Master of the Orange Lodge. But I mean, now globalisation has moved that on a bit, but McGuckans are still really absolutely based in Ballinderry. They were a sept of the O'Neill clan or whatever. But I find that whole story of conversion for self-interest, presumably. Why else not?
Conversion to Protestantism.
To the Church of Ireland, to Anglicanism.
Okay.
Yeah, there is no
From
such thing
Catholicism.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there is.
But you reject the label of Protestantism.
Absolutely. That just means not Catholic but Christian,
Yes.
But at the end of the day, I mean, of course, there is Orthodox as well.
But I think that's relevant to be in Ireland as a Christian and not Catholic.
I guess so. I guess so. I mean, that's a very much an Irish label.
Exactly.
That's not because
kind of an innuendo or something.
Yeah. No, it's not even that. It's not the innuendo. It's just the fact that it's the whole not Catholic thing. Then, for instance, why the Catholic? For instance, we forget that the Puritans were suppressed under the British rule, and the thing is, in England, you would see the division would be between Anglican and Low Church. So, but here, that just shows the ludicrousness of the whole thing. Like the idea of such a thing as a Protestant school, because there's far less in common, really. I mean, or there's no more commonality between Presbyterian and Church of Ireland than there is between Church of Ireland and Catholic.
So it's wrong. I think I see where you're going. It's wrong to group these guys together.
Yeah, but not only that, but I wasn't brought up in it.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
So what were you brought up in?
My parents were at least agnostic, if not atheist.
So you didn't go to anything on Christmas Day?
On Christmas Day I did, the only day I did. So they had a cultural relationship with the songs and stories of their upbringing, like most of us do. They were left-wing intellectuals.
Really?
And I guess in some ways the whole Christianity thing was so strong for them that they didn't feel any personal need. Like my father waxed endlessly and in fact wrote books about, how important it was that the Protestant minority sustained. But he himself didn't go, he didn't go to church. So I was brought, and I was confirmed in my 30s.
Confirmed
in the Church of Ireland in my 30s.
Okay.
Yeah. So basically I went to Protestant schools because in those days and we're talking the 60s, it would have been slightly difficult for me to go to a Catholic school,
Okay.
in the sense that, I mean, I know my parents considered it. I mean, at national level, there was a national school at the bottom of the road, the Church of Ireland National School, which was a wonderful thing, you know.
Where did you grow up?
Booterstown.
Booterstown.
So I went to the Church of Ireland National School,
Okay.
which was fantastic. And then I actually went to a wonderful private school for 2 years, where I got most of my education, which was an interdenominational school.
Called?
Park House,
Okay.
which is now closed. And that was the fount. I have to say it's unfortunate. I mean, that 2 years in that very private school, I mean, tiny class, etc., was the fount of all my education, really. Most of it, apart from the Irish, I got from national school.
Wow.
And then I went to a Presbyterian school, St Andrews. And the reason I went there is because the original multi-denominational school had closed, and it was St Andrews was on my road, and my parents had kind of thrown in the towel at that point. And I mean, I could have gone to the local convent school, and they considered that. But it would have been mildly difficult. I would have been the one non-Catholic person in the class.
Okay.
I think I would have had to. There would have been a bit of an atmosphere,
So
slight.
Instead of me, and I know I'm not shocked, but I'm surprised, and I suppose I'm kind of humbled by your response to that question, that I didn't even think much of, and that's the problem, I suppose.
Yes,
you
it
would
is.
say. It's not even properly engaging with the issue. Would you say the only reason I'm giving that as a premise is I didn't intend to dwell on this so much, but I will. I'll keep going. Would you say that you were a Christian before saying that you're a Protestant? Is that what this is about? We're focusing on the wrong thing.
Oh, well, I wouldn't be bothered calling myself a Protestant, or certainly never a Protestant.
Yeah. So that label is very even hurtful for you. Is that the right word?
Yeah, I
Upsetting.
think it is. Yeah, because it's actually, it is. It's because it's basically non-Catholic, you know.
Yes.
And also,
you're not one of us.
yes, and it's the whole protesting thing, but really the protesting, which I think was fairly legitimate. I mean, most
Absolutely.
people. Well, I mean, but it's a long time ago, like, you know,
Yeah.
it's like 1531 or whatever. So, like, really, I don't see myself as. I don't like, I suppose in some ways it's because you hear the ring of Protestants and Catholics in the north, you know, and so
And
I
even
don't
now-
like, it's a very ugly attempt to group anything that isn't Catholic into one. And of course I was educated with Jews as well, because it was everyone who wasn't, you know, anything else. So actually what I did have from my education in St Andrews College was very interesting, because it was struggling out of the British Empire, basically, as one of my friends said to me. So you had, and it was basically a lower middle class Protestant school.
Okay.
So you had very little intellectual aspiration.
Really?
Yeah, and very small numbers going to college, say for instance, very small. And just because people just had different opportunities, they had opportunities. It was very much that the end of that kind of mercantile Protestant culture in Ireland, whereby you would have gone into father's insurance company, you would have gone into the Ulster Bank, you would have gone into the trade, the shop or whatever. And I mean, my background couldn't have been more different. I mean, if there was any message to anyone, is just it's not right to send your child into a culture where they will be different from their home culture to that degree, because they won't know how to make the transition. But also,
Right.
the only other thing about
So do you
it...
resent that you went to Andrews?
No. But the only other thing about it is that because it was kind of a catch-all, it was co-ed,
Yes.
and not Catholic. We had the Americans, or it was an American school, they did American history. We had Jews, etc. So there was that diversity. Now that's been built on now, and what you would look at it now, it's almost an international school apparently.
Yes, the IB and all this.
Yeah, they do the international baccalaureate. But even then, there were, like, the embassy staff and everybody went there. So I had, like, two of my very closest school friends, of which now I probably only have about 4 left, are American. So, and I think the reason that I gravitated towards them was because they could teach me more, obviously, because they had... I was interested in the wider world, you know. I mean, I was sitting there in the 1970s Ireland. But also because they weren't exactly from the same stratum, which was less similar to my background, you know. So So anyway, listen, I struggled through St Andrews. I stuck out like a sore thumb. You know, my background was very different to theirs.
So what were your parents doing? What made you so different from the Andrews people exactly?
Well, because my father was at that point working in RTE. He was a founder journalist in RTE.
So he wasn't part of this, as you said, the mercantile class that you were just talking about? Really?
My father was a journalist, writer, playwright. He was a senior executive in RTE, so of the national broadcaster, regarded himself as being a founding member of Ireland's ability to see itself, you know, like, so absolute was certainly profoundly nationalistic in the widest sense. Was certainly he was the vice chair of the European Broadcasting Union, so he would have been travelling all over Europe all the time, very much an internationalist. When RTE started, you know, it had
1952
61, yeah. It had, like, for instance, the person immediately above him was a Swedish convert to Lutheranism from Judaism. So, I mean, you know, it was a very arty, you know, my family home was full of paintings. I was surrounded by artists, writers. I met Seamus Heaney in my own bedroom as a child. You know, I met everybody. So, and I mean, in those days they used to they invited people because they were interesting in a way that I would never do. I mean, there's an element of salon, you know. They invited kind of people,
yes,
and they sat around as bigwigs and talked about, you know, things. And it's all about, you know, John Borman in my home. So
you must have
probably I could overstate that. I mean, my father was. I mean, my mother would kind of almost fairly kind of slightly look down on my father's background in the sense that it was the lower middle class or working class English background, whereby, you know, he liked tripe and onions, he liked spotted dick or whatever, he liked you know, bread and dripping.
And what about your mum then?
Well, my mother came from my teaching. So basically my granny, they're very interesting people. My grandfather was a headmaster in the school, and so it's a part of the north of the north, which is in Donegal, but actually should be in the north. And the Boundary Commission said it should be, and they never changed it. Wow. So my grandfather would have been teaching in the British system, and would have found himself suddenly teaching in the Irish Free State. I have no idea. I used to laugh at that, but actually I don't really laugh at it anymore now. Because I started doing some genealogical research, and I realised that basically from partition they were destroyed. Now partly it's because rural Ireland is no longer what it was, but huge numbers of them went to the other side of the border. So yeah.
Is that, I remember we saw you up in Dunleary there, is that anything to do with that?
No, that would have been a place
is that further west?
Maids came from. Yeah, oh absolutely, yeah. Okay. My granny would have considered, I mean, East Donegal, where the land, the good land is where the planters were planted in the 1600s, probably about 1610. And my granny's family...
Planted by Cromwell? Or?
Planted by the British Crown. Okay. Planted by the British Crown in order to rid them of two things: Presbyterians, and also the Gaelic natives as such were also restless. So it was meant to kill two birds with one stone. Wow. And so the Presbyterians, their family were Woods, and they came in there, and they didn't move for 400 years. I mean, like, they built a church. First you started off with a little sort of shed, and then they built. And the fascinating thing is when I look back and I look at pictures of, say, the schoolroom in the 1930s. Well, I recognise and know the names of a large proportion of the people in it, because they're still the people. It's like a sitcom, whereby, well, it's actually like rural America. It's actually what it is, like what it would remind you of most of all. And that's not surprising because of the massive impact of Ulster Protestantism on parts particularly of the south. So it's like, I mean, it's, you know, such and such the shopkeeper that, you know, I'm actually related by marriage to John or by to John McCain. So that's the, you know, and McCain's Corner, and I was married, you know, one of my horrible aunts was a shocking, scary lady, really scary, whose poor relation actually did the shopkeeping on a Zimmer frame. Okay, so nasty Auntie Alice used to sit in the corner, just being evil, whereby the evil kind of pretty much go through the walls of the house, you know, and Auntie Amy, I think, was on a Zimmer frame going up and down the shopkeeping shop. So that was it, but it was, you know, the whole brass weights and everything like this. So so that they didn't move from there. And then, you know, there's great fascinating stories of them. I mean, there was a Huguenot part of them, which I like to romanticize. And so that would be religious refugees from France.
Okay.
Low church religious refugees from France, who would have brought the linen business. And my granny started a shirt factory, so there was all of that.
You said your parents was it left-wing intellectuals, or so tell me about your influences intellectually, I suppose, for you, and ideologically. What were you reading? What took you by storm? You said Park House was the most you learned ever. So what was so special about Park House? You are clearly incredibly well read, incredibly articulate, and fascinated and fascinating. So where did that all?
Well, I mean, I grew up in an incredible crucible. I mean, you know, a crucible of learning. I mean, you know, I mean, my father was a Greek and a classics scholar. So, I mean, I had walls covered in Greek, you know, mythology. I mean, you know, my mother had a degree in English and French, which is, I mean, when saying that, actually my granny, as you say, my granny in Donegal had come to Dublin to learn to teach. So I mean, there were, and then started a shirt factory. So there were incredibly, my mother's family was very focused on education as well, and so my mother also had a massive and incredible relationship with literature, and you know, would have recited Tennyson to me, and you know, no, so really, yeah, I mean, I was.
Age? Like
from earliest childhood. I mean, and then my brother was, my brother went on to become an eminent historian of the Soviet Union and spoke fluent Russian. And my sister, we all kind of go east. I think that's to do with the fact we saw a lot of icons growing up on our walls. Or else it was early Irish religious art, I don't know which. But my sister ended up going to Thailand, and then, you know, like, so
What kind of icons were on the walls?
Well, my father loved Greek, you know, the Greek Orthodox tradition. So I often think I still have a real connection with icons. So
Christian icons, or what kind of
Orthodox images from the Orthodox tradition.
Okay.
So I still have a real feeling for them.
Wow.
And I wonder, they are very close because they're kind of, what's the word they have? They're two-dimensional. They're quite close to early Christian religious art, which I saw buckets of, because RTE in its early days was all about the Irish tradition. So like, I mean, I went an archaeological dig when I was 14, you know, like, I mean, so like, and I was an only child because my brother and sister, I was an accident that happened to my mother in her 40s. My brother and sister were both gone. So there was actually very much benign neglect. I mean, I wasn't neglected, you know, but I mean, admittedly, most people of my generation were neglected, but I was definitely seriously neglected. However, I also was surrounded by books.
Meaning you just didn't get a lot of attention and family time?
No.
They'd been there until that.
Yeah, well, I mean, my father was for a man of his era, was really an incredibly engaged father. You know, in that he was engaged at all. I mean, like, he was really. I mean, he was very much. I mean, he made me my breakfast every morning. He was very unusual. My mother was very unusual in a bad way. You know, so she really had, I would say, a personality disorder. I mean, my mother was. Yeah, really impossible, you know. Wow. She was very talented. Again, I grew up as well in a huge garden. So I grew up in this incredible garden where she basically recreated her childhood Donegal garden, which was in a farm. We grew fruit, we grew strawberries, we grew all our vegetables. It was like this jungle of trees that I had, and by the sea.
Could she have been wrestling with restrictions?
No.
Why?
I think she was born like that. Yeah.
She was born like that.
Yeah. My honest appraisal currently is that she had autistic traits. I have a son with autism, and I think that she did. I think she had autistic traits. Clearly, she was. I mean, I have become much less engaged with the whole psychological, you know, he did that to me, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when you
Stuff.
once you have one kind of disability in your family, you tend to sort of reassess a lot of things. And really, my mother was stuck out like a sore thumb in relation to her family. In that, I still sing in the choir with my uncle, who's 90 now, her brother.
Wow.
And he's fabulous. And my granny was fabulous. And, you know, I don't believe there's anything to do with my mother's upbringing. I think that was, I think she was born like that.
Can I ask you about a funny story you told me once about where you met your now husband? Was that when you were in college, in the Piper's Club, or
Not
you're a bit
at
older?
all. Much older, yeah.
Okay, so tell me about between finishing school through up there, and then I really want you to tell me about meeting Amy, because I love that story.
Okay, but that's really
That's a long time,
decades later. Okay, so what did I do? I went to Trinity, which was fantastic. I had this road to Damascus experience whereby I was halfway through sixth year, I think, and I was writing a story at my dining table, and I thought, I'm really enjoying this. And then I thought, I actually had this sentence came to me, I'm going to enjoy myself for the rest of my life.
That's amazing.
It is amazing. And so I ran upstairs to my mother and said, I'm not going to do law.
It's like a divine revelation.
It was, yeah, I'm not going to do law, I'm going to do arts. And she, of course, this being a family where the Trinity calendar was in the home, I got it, I said, I'm going to do English, and then what will I do? And it was and from that moment on, the world just exploded. And so
And it was at a time of explosion in Ireland, wasn't it? Is that fair? At least some sort of revolution.
No, definitely not, no.
The 70s?
No, I wouldn't.
I've heard the 60s came to Ireland in the 70s.
Well, I guess when you're living through something, it's not. It doesn't. I mean,
Doesn't feel like it.
I didn't experience any revolution because I was too young. In the sense that maybe from the 50s to the 60s, I think is the big difference. Like Lamass, I was too young. Lamass would have been like I was only a child, little child.
Modernizer.
Yeah, and really, I grew up in a very, you know, like whereby the broad strokes of today's situation were there, you know, without any doubt.
Fair enough.
I mean, in South County Dublin, you know, was a bubble of development and such.
Okay.
But anyway, so I went to Trinity. I did English, and anyway, a long story, but I ended up doing Italian kind of by default.
Okay.
But that was the influence of my parents, without a doubt, who had loved Italy. You know?
Italophiles.
Yeah. Which was interesting because that would have been post-war, so they would have been choosing a country that was on the other side and also a Catholic country. So that would be because my father would be
rules in your
very anti. I mean, probably wouldn't have had the nerve and bloody right to go to war. But at the same time, remember, his contemporaries would have gone to war. So how was he justifying? His brother went to war. So anyway, so off they went, and so I learned Italian, and I had a wonderful time doing English. Didn't have a wonderful time doing Italian, and then I came out into a massive recession, far worse than anything you guys experienced. Far worse. It was just because we really had no economy to fall back on, and so. Mid-80s, so basically everybody left the country. I mean, we're talking 20% unemployment with mass immigration. So there was just absolutely nothing. There was nothing. I remember applying for a job in a laundrette and kind of discussing my studies, etc., and not getting it. So what I wanted to do, so interesting, what did I do? A lot of flapping around, you know,
really,
in truth. Yeah. Basically, I wanted to write. And I was in a great difficulty because how was I going to support myself? So I possibly could have done a journalism course, except I didn't have any money.
Okay.
My father died in...
Were you living at home?
No, I left home.
Okay.
My father died in 1980. My father died the year I started college.
Okay.
So obviously that's a massive, leaving me with the arch, what can I say, Cruella de Vil. And
what was that word?
Cruella de Vil, yeah. And so the thing is that, and my brother and sister were living abroad. So I am very much a kind of a Matilda character in a sense. I identify with these. And so anyway, I didn't have any financial resources, and I don't think in those days you really couldn't borrow unless your parents underwrote it. I wasn't going to ask my mother for anything.
Okay.
So I couldn't, there were no jobs as a teacher. I couldn't train as a teacher. There were no jobs anyway. That was really where probably my natural orientation. I couldn't go and do NIHE journalism, do a master's in journalism because I had no money. So I did a master's in English, and the reason I did that was because Trinity funded me to do it. And so basically all I did was, my only aim was to be able to write and continue to develop. But I mean, these are thought processes that nowadays I do not believe young people have. I mean, they're much more focused on, admittedly, accommodation's much more expensive.
And you also said, one thing I took, you said flapping around. We don't really, we're put on tracks.
Yes, well, the
everything's
thing is
micromanaged, it seems.
Yes,
where you guys had a bit more freedom to figure it out.
Well, we also had less opportunity, which gave us more freedom.
Yes.
So the fact is that really everyone in Dublin that I knew was living on the dole, was living on social welfare. So it was ultimately like a guaranteed basic income society. And you could live on it, though. I mean, my rent was £15 a week, in for a bedsit. Horrible bedsit.
And how much was the dole?
Well, I mean, I was very poor. I mean, I think I was working in a shop as well, and I mean, I think I lived on less than £50 a week. I think I 40 something. I was really hungry. I was hungry to the point that when I brought home my groceries, I ate them all. Yeah,
it was tough.
It was stupid, really. I mean, like the thing is, I did the suffering artist bit.
Yes.
And I learned a lot because Dublin at that point, though incredibly economically blighted, was very, very rich culturally.
I was talking to Liz Hand about that.
Yeah.
All these bars and pubs and
all the art
venues.
things that you know now. A lot of them started then, like the people that I went to college with started Rough Magic Theatre Company, was Alan Gilstone, a filmmaker, was my great friend. I mean, these people were doing amazing stuff. And so there was all that. And the choice was to go to London. Oh, that was the other choice. And then I would have been turned into a sausage. I could have gone into publishing or something. I was a bright girl, and I would have come out a sausage, but at least I would have been earning.
You mean
but
you
I didn't want
I
didn't want to go to Thatcher's Britain. So I was left in this awful, I mean, it's what Bono said, I don't want to work in Maggie's farm no more. I didn't like the feeling from a position of ignorance. I'm now sorry I never lived in London, but
really?
Well, I mean, London's fabulous, but I mean, Thatcher's Britain, I didn't want to go there. So I was left in this awful situation, and I also feel that possibly I wanted to stay in Ireland because my sense of my identity was probably fairly fragmented because of my father's death, possibly. And so I think now that in a way the place took on the mantle of home and the mantle of identity.
Cool.
And I really wanted to stay in Ireland. Anyway, I couldn't. So what happened then was I got my master's degree. I mean, I spent just long hours slaving on this thesis in a freezing cold bedsit. And, just beginning, falling apart physically and everything. And I look back and maybe I needed to go through that purgatory. Maybe people do. But it certainly didn't make life easy for myself. So then because I didn't know what to do, I still wanted to write. And how was I going to support myself?
What was your thesis? Sorry, what was your... Can you remember?
So yes, I can. It's still sitting there for anyone to peruse. It was on the poet Sylvia Plath, the American poet.
So would you have she was the one who put her head in the oven?
That wasn't the only thing she did. In fact, I quoted her this week in an article I wrote.
Cool.
I quoted her about talking to her young baby, saying, and she has a line which is, "You are the ones solid the spaces lean on, envious. You are the baby in the barn," which is incredibly profound. I was talking about the nativity, incredibly profound in the sense of the essential solidity of the child and whatever. So anyway, I still really enjoyed poetry. But look, I don't know what I was doing.
Could you have gone on to do a doctorate?
Oh yeah.
Why didn't you?
Because I didn't want to be a university lecturer.
One of these stiff.
Yeah, I'm not cut out to.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm probably not very good at being in employment. I'm certainly not very good at. I just couldn't. I'm not interested in criticism. I mean, I'm just not interested in criticism.
You want to be your own.
Yeah, I want to make my own stories. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Well, it is fair enough. At the same time, you do have to live.
So you did your masters.
Then I went to Italy, and I worked in the University of Pavia, And the reason I did that was because it was something that would give me 12 hours of work and that I would have the rest of the time to myself, ostensibly.
You were doing 12 hours of work
Yeah.
a week?
Yeah. Yeah.
Teaching?
Yeah. Yeah, teaching, in a university. I mean,
Unbelievable.
Well, I mean, I did a bit of translation as well. I basically survived, and I wrote.
Did you have any little romantic trips down any little rivers or
Absolutely. I mean,
that?
I knew Italy already very well.
Is that Venice that they do that?
Venice, you're good. Yeah,
all sorts of.
I went to it. You really are. Yeah, no.
I don't know anything, Victoria.
It's very sad. Yeah,
that's why I'm here. That's why I'm talking to you.
Well, no, I'm sure I learned as much from you. Yeah, no. In fact, I went to Venice's carnival by train. Actually, no. I mean, look. The thing is, this is again the broad strokes. Italy is like, it's not really a country, it's a whole load of nation states.
Yes.
Where I was Pavia. I was not on the coast, which is very hard for someone who grew up on the coast like me. The weather is shocking in Pavia. The Alps hold the air in, and there's a thing called freezing fog, la nebbia,
wow.
which is also filthy because the Po Valley is also very industrial. And there's rice fields all about. The biggest wealth producer they have there is rice fields, because risotto is their big thing there, and the rice fields breed mosquitoes. So once the nebbia goes, you have the zanzare, which is the mosquitoes, and that place basically hasn't shifted since the year 1000, I would say. The road they called Strada Nuova, the new street, was built by the Romans.
Wow.
So the university is the second oldest in the world.
Cool.
But
that's where you taught?
A desperately depressing place. Yeah. I mean, depressing. I mean, for a start, Italy was and not always will be, but certainly in the medium term will be a complete basket case. So the university was appalling.
Really?
We're talking the English department. The main room was a whole load of desks, like any desks that people would have brought from their garages, all around the walls. The library, there was no reference library. The library kind of shut at tea time and shut at lunchtime.
Why was there such systemic badness?
Because Italy's never developed
together.
It's never.
Okay.
The Italian reunification has never worked.
Wow.
As we can see now, I mean, none of this surprises me that's going on now. So, but it was very rich. So you're talking about like Italy was having a boom, and the north of Italy is very rich anyway. And these people have always had money. I mean, so you're coming from a country where really there's very little history of wealth. I mean, this is astonishing. But was at the same time, despite the recession, actually very functional by comparison.
Ireland, you're referring to.
Yeah, because I mean the basic.
That came from the British, didn't it? The structures.
And also from the mass on. I mean, the basic structures, the Republican things as well worked. I mean, there was, although we, were in a recession, still the structures that allowed us to develop economically were all laid down by then. And so I was coming from a country where you opened a bank account, you went to a college, where you go to a country where, your bank account, you have, I mean, I can't describe, they didn't even have a computer. When I lost my bank book, they couldn't find my account. I mean, where nothing is as it seems, where they assume that the money I have in the bank must have come from my parents because people stayed children until they were like 38. Because it's this paternalistic society, whereby like my best friend from Italy moved to London, although her field is Italian Renaissance art, because she didn't want to spend 10 years trying to gain influence with people in order to get ahead. I mean, like a level of corruption. I mean, I had to have, in order to be paid, I was paid in about March and I started in November. In order to be paid, I had to have an officially translated document into Latin saying that I had completed primary school, and it had to have a stamp on it that you had to pay for. I mean, like, so you're talking, corruption. Somebody said to me, just imagine, an English lecturer said some interesting things. First, forget everything you know about your own country and college and stuff. This has nothing to do with it. A. B. Imagine you're in India and it'll all seem okay. And so that...
imagine how bad it could be.
Yeah, no, basically we're talking, and we're not talking first world structures.
Yeah.
And so, but then also there was no life. I wouldn't mind that. But I mean, the place was dead as the
sounds like you had a terrible time.
Yeah. like, I mean, dead as the dodo. I mean, for a start, Ireland is a very young country. This is very old, very dead. Nothing happening. And I interviewed I started to do a bit of journalism. I interviewed the playwright Dario Fo. I actually wrote him a little note and he rang me. It was amazing. It was a Nobel Prize winning playwright. Wow. And I said, this place is dead, whatever. And he said, yes, the bourgeoisie has won. Which is an astonishing statement, wasn't it? Wow. The bourgeoisie has won for the moment, he said. So anyway, that was Italy. Yes, I had a very dull time. I was very, very lonely. I mean, in those days, there was no internet. I didn't have a mobile phone. I used to ring anybody, by making a legal phone call from the English department during the weekend. I made one friend, but I wrote quite a bit, and of course I travelled a lot in Italy.
So how long were you there?
I was only there a year, because what happened was I was very homesick, but I was planning to spend another year there, and I was going to do a theatre course or something. And
be in the theatre, acting?
Yeah. Yeah, actually, there was a wonderful theatre group called, I love Commedia dell'arte, that's Italian style of theatre, and there was a very interesting group in Parma, and they did courses, and I thought, I'll do that. And I was writing away. I was writing, nothing else to do. I was writing on a fridge that I put my feet into, and I wrote on the top. But anyway, what happened was that I applied for a job as a radio producer in RTE. For the first time, so this is this is germane to what you want to talk about. For the first time, I didn't have to hide all the things I'd done, but everything I did seemed to make sense in the application, whereby I thought, this is really where I'm going, In
RTE.
Radio production. I love the radio, even now, and journalism, basically, and anyway, what happened was I got onto, they were planning to do 2 training courses and then make panels, and I got on, which was unbelievable. It was 1988 or whatever, I didn't know anybody. Radio. I went in and I mean, interestingly, my father had been in RTE when he died in 1980, but this had no impact if you hear the story,
The nepotism wasn't helping.
No. What happened was then I went back, and I was very delighted, and I was dying to come back to Ireland. I gave up my flat, I gave up my job, and they'd done a little goodbye ceremony for me, everything, because I loved teaching, so I was a popular teacher, I will say, though, unblushingly. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't have that I'm bad thing. I didn't have that sense of I am the professora, or whatever, because you don't in this culture, but they do there. But anyway, yes, I came back into a situation where I had left my job, I had left my flat, which initially was harder than getting a job. They had a massive accommodation crisis then, that kind of just like we have now, whereby I had a line of people outside my door waiting to get my flat when I left, and the reason that I got the flat was because I was foreign, and they knew that I wouldn't stay, because they had very good control and support for tenancies, which actually didn't work. So people prepared to leave their flats empty. So it's not easy to solve a homeless crisis. But anyway, so I remember it was booming as well. It was an absolute boom, a Thatcherite boom going on. So I found myself back here with nothing. So I had, very little money.
Where did you live?
I moved back into my mother's house for about a month.
Okay.
I was longing for Italy. Ultimately moving.
Really?
Yeah, but the thing is, people are, moving home is as hard as moving away, and wherever you are, you wish, but you always wish you were where you weren't, and so I spent all of my time playing Italian music and la 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 la, for ages. Really? But then anyway, my life, so this is a positive story, it's positive themes. My life just really came together, whereby maybe you do need a bit like Dante to go through the middle of the journey of my life. I found myself in a dark wood. Because what happened was that my world just came together. I had some ex-college friends, and one of my friends, Paddy, and they had rented a little house in the Liberties, and Grey Street, and a little dark, 2 up, 2 down. And I was out with one of my friends, and he was rung to say that one of the girls was leaving the house, and I had the room. So began one of the happiest periods of my life, because I moved in with 2 guys, and then one of the guys left, and one of my other college friends moved in. I'm still really close to all those people, and the Liberties was, I was living in the centre of town, so I was living a bit like I had done in Italy, in that I was re-inhabiting the inner city. And so every day, I cycled down past the old Black Pool of Dublin. I could feel it underneath me as I was going down past the Olympia Theatre. I could feel the actual bones of the original Dublin, because I was living in the oldest part of Dublin, and I became fascinated by the names. I read a book by Peter Somerville Large on the history of Dublin. I was fascinated by, there were thousands of years of history. I mean, Thomas Street is from Thomas a Becket. Francis Street is the monastery of St. Francis. And those, at the time, you were going back to Dickens up there. I mean, there was coal smog, which was terrible, but very atmospheric. There was a pig factory, actually.
Yeah.
I saw a pig running down the road. There was a little shop.
It's exciting.
I opened the door and it went ping. I walked in, and and a little old lady and man, and they'd wrap up the bottle of stout or whatever in a brown paper. There were still old Huguenot bakeries, because it had been an old Huguenot. So I was, because my dad, would have loved Dublin, and so I would have got all of that in through my veins. So I had a wonderful. Now, admittedly, I had no job. So this is where I began my whole sort of professional career, whereby again, you could live on my rent was like £18 a week. So this is the difference now, I started doing 2 things, teaching and journalism, which is all I could do. And teaching. I taught Italian in 3 different places. And I taught, I think, creative writing. Yes, because I published a book of short stories at that time as well. And I taught all loads of things, and then I got a job in a vocational school where I was teaching part-time in the Liberties vocational school, and then I started doing bits of journalism. And what happened within about 9 months was the journalism took over, whereby I couldn't keep it all going. And the journalism was more lucrative and easier, and I didn't have chalk all over my fingers, because teaching is so bloody hard, So I chucked the whole of the teaching, and I just.
What level were you teaching? What ages were the people?
I taught a vocational school. Yeah, I taught secondary vocational.
And they were giving you a hard time?
Oh yeah, I mean, there were children with a lot of disadvantage, and they were great kids. I mean, I'm not being patronising. I mean, they really were great kids. I mean, but the usual carrots aren't there for them. They're not going to be doing the leaving and da-da-da. So I found the teachers very, very inspiring. You have to kind of use Montessori methods. We really didn't have the resources or the training to deal with hyperactivity, which was constant. Like at one point, somebody put desks the whole way across my room, and they just got on with their own thing behind me, like playing cards. Like they just weren't listening to me at all. Another thing a teacher once said, one of her worst moments was when Margaret Thatcher was coming over in a helicopter, and all the kids jumped up on the desk and started going da 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 da. And so at one point she had the window opened at the back, and quite a few of them just went out the back window. Another was Miss, I'm Boston, Miss. They called me. It was in the Liberties vocational school, in the Liberties opposite Patrick's Cathedral. So emotional, where I was confirmed later. But anyway, they called me Snowy. I've got Snowy, and I was teaching Irish religion, I think, media studies. I mean, like,
all sorts.
I was completely, I was 25 or something, Anyway, so anyway, listen, it was fantastic in the sense that I have nothing. I get down on my hands and knees at the people who do it. I was so tired that by 5, I remember going to bed at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I just was exhausted. I found it all very hard. I found it wonderful though. I've always loved teaching. If teaching had been something that you could easily go into or could go into, I would have been, I think, a teacher. But anyway, I ended up, and maybe I'll go back to teaching. But anyway, what I did was the journalism took over. I started writing for a theatre magazine, and I did very well at it. Because I realised that I'd been all those years of going to the theatre. The theatre was very alive in Dublin at that point in the 80s. Had all come in and done something, and whereby I ended up doing very well at that. I ended up being a guest editor. Then I offered myself to the Irish Times to write for the theatre festival when they needed loads and loads of new people, and I came in and did it. Those were overnight reviews. You went into the office after you'd seen the show and wrote then and there. Amazing.
And it would be printed the next day
on a typewriter, which that was the hardest part. They still had typewriters. Yeah, printed the next day. Very exciting. Open the paper. There you are. I was asked then to write features by the arts editor, and then the features editor asked Caroline Walsh, who is a major mentor in my life. She took me on. She asked me to do a couple of things. Didn't like one of them. It started off slow. Then I think she loved me and I certainly loved her. So I became a really regular freelance for the Irish Times features page.
Okay. Features, is that like opinion or
no,
or
definitely not.
What is features?
Well, you asked me some of the things that I liked doing best, and Caroline and I had a similar sense of humour, and so features are whereby you write you go out and you report as such, but like the thing is you write it as a story really.
Okay.
So for instance, what are the things I really loved? Well, I went to the Ballybunny Bachelor competition, for instance, and I wrote a really funny piece, and I had such a good time. I went to one
Ballybunny what?
Bachelor Festival.
Okay, so yeah.
That was just hilarious.
Great crack.
Whereby I always remember. I mean, what I particularly liked is my speciality. Well, I think it's because I have a good memory for speech. I actually think because you can't. I wasn't recording because it's too time consuming. So I would be taking notes, but I think I would remember the speech better than others. I think that was probably my competitive advantage if I had one.
Yes.
But anyway, I remember there was brilliant moments. We went down to Glentford Hotel in Limerick, and there was 30 lady chauffeurs. The lady chauffeurs were coming from Ballybunnon to meet the bachelors, and I remember one guy was having his lunch and his tie was in his dinner in the gravy. And he was the guy who won, okay? Because the fascinating thing, there was one American there, and he just didn't get it, because the point is a bachelor festival in Ireland is not about someone wanting to meet a woman, it's someone who has escaped meeting a woman, and it's therefore, sort of go for it. Well, me father didn't get married till he was 55, and so that was it. So anyway, along came the lady chauffeurs, and the lady chauffeurs came along, and I remember I asked one of them, I asked her, did you not think there was something just a little bit sexist about, the lady chauffeurs and being lady chauffeur? And she goes, oh no, they'd be chivalrous, like they'd open the door for you. And the person she was driving, the bachelor, says, I'd have opened more than that if I was let. That's just classic. I loved moments like that. And another thing, if you look back, what do I love? Well, I went to...
What was the bachelor competition?
It's still going.
Is it like the Rose of Tralee
I
for
can
men
sing
or
the
something?
song. No, because actually, as I've said, it isn't about marriageability. Interestingly, the Rose of Tralee is about marriageability, and this is why...
The perfect catch.
Yes, because, it's so hilarious, because it's like... No, she isn't just a clever girl or a beautiful girl, because frankly, that doesn't butter spuds either, does it? So no, she's doing medicine, and she's a beautiful girl. So that's the Irish, it's the 600 points, and that's the Irish dream. But this is why when there was the gay Maria Walsh, it's hang on, because they're meant to be marriageable, so how does that work out? That's why there was this stutter, but which Irish society was able to cope with, certainly. But no, because the Ballybunnon Bachelor competition is about being unmarriageable as such, and at the end of it, I went into a pub, and there was one guy sitting there in the dark of like 3 o'clock in the afternoon drinking, and he said he had been a Ballybunnon Bachelor, and I said, And, you know, and did he ever marry? And he said, no, can't you see from the cut of me? Which is actually really sad, you know. So in truth, there's a nasty side to all of this because, and then there was, the organizer kept on going on about how many girls the batches would shift on the beach, you know. And my editor was ringing me saying, what does shift mean exactly, like, you know.
So you're writing about all this.
I had a brilliant time. And another one I really do remember is that when I went to a fesh for an Irish dancing competition, and I always remember well, one of the organisers said to me, and I didn't report this because I didn't have it taped. It was the minute she saw me walking in, obviously I was an Irish Times journalist. She said, if they all had these abortions, who would there be to do the Irish dancing? And I said, well, that's kind of an unusual. But then also I talked to one of the guys and he goes, yeah, well, make or break for the boys tends to be when they get the kilts. When the kilts come, the boys lead the Irish dancing. But then once come 17 or 18, they get a sneaking respect for you because they realise you have a free field. So anyway, what did I know? I loved myself and Caroline. Caroline was hilarious, inspired, pixie dust. She, you know, would stand up in the middle of the room shouting and screaming and roaring. And
is she still alive?
No, and she tragically died. Tomorrow, I think I'm not quite sure, maybe 5-6 years ago. Far too young, and you know, I really grieve her. And I always remember one night, it used to get kind of really hectic late at night in the Irish Times, in a way it probably doesn't now. And I remember there was a case of bestiality in the courts, and her comment was, and the headline is, any port in a storm. But it was just, I mean, it's this kind of, that you'd look back and you'd think, oh my God, so just fun, you know, like so fun. And so anyway, I did that for 4 years, and I worked as a freelance for 4 years, and I worked like a dog. I mean, I had no holidays. I wasn't getting to do almost any other writing because I had no time off. I was in the state whereby the phone could go, you know what I mean? So, and the attitude was I was kind of lucky to have it. I mean, remember this was, and so there is an interesting story about this.
Of Irish journalism.
Well, except that it was also there was never a time when it was easy to get work, you know?
Yeah. So,
and they all had these minted jobs. So, and I was living on, you know, oil rag or whatever, sniffing oil rag. And so I finally said, right, well, I'm getting nowhere here. I either am going to get a job or else I'll go in a different career path. And I considered this fairly straightforward. So I contacted them and said, you know. So, I mean, the guy who was in charge of personnel didn't like me at all. He came in, he saw I brought in my pay slips, and he looked at them, and I think he threw them up in the air. He said, that this doesn't say anything to me. We don't know anything about you, really. Can you write opinion? Can you write some opinion articles, and let's see what you're made of?
Wow.
So I sat down and I wrote 3 opinion articles, and the first one was a one about how Ireland was a gerontocracy. Basically, it was about to the point of the fact that they had a job. I started off saying, did you ever notice something about people who say that full-time jobs are a thing of the past? Is that they have one themselves? So I continued on in that vein. And apparently brought the editor at the time, Conor Brady, to tears to his eyes, whatever, because basically it was like, give me a job. So I went in one morning to find my copy, whatever, and there was an email from him saying that I was going to get a contract. So now really that was still gold dust. It was gold dust then, you know. And so anyway, but the only job they had was a job which was which was filling in on the arts desk, basically. And I had been working as a features writer. So began kind of an element whereby you can say my meteoric ascent, or else you can say it's my tragic demise, because in a sense I did my job was half writing, half editing. So I found myself as a commissioning editor. And then Paddy Woodworth was the arts editor. A tragic thing happened to him. His brother dropped dead, and he really had a period whereby he just wasn't wanting to be in the office and focusing on his job, quite understandably, because he was really shocked.
Yes.
And so I filled in far more than.
Okay.
So I ended up just being a commissioning editor, and
As in, you didn't get to write yourself. Is that what that means?
yes, it does. A. B. I'm really not interested in writing about the arts very much. Now this is seemingly people regard this as just heterodox, because
Yes.
I've written so much about the arts, and they would be, if they were in the arts, they'd be hanging on every word. And the reason that I don't want is, A, I don't find it difficult. The reason is that the artist owns the creativity. So your level of creativity that you can apply to that is very limited. And if you apply too much creativity, you're actually not doing a good job. Yeah. So and also, again, the limited nature of the subject matter at the end of the day got to me. So, but regardless, anyway, what happened was I was on a kind of toboggan ride, and what happened was that very soon after that, Paddy decided to give up his job again. He reassessed his priorities after the death of his brother, and I was it, and I was regarded, so I was very much like, basically, you're it, you're the coming thing, you're this, that and the other and all, which I found I was quite resistant, because actually I didn't even want to be the coming thing. I didn't want to be the present thing. So, but however, at about 4:45 on the day that the applications had to be in for arts editor, I put mine in. Because my feeling was that if I didn't do it, I would probably have no job, because the job I was doing would probably be gone. But also it was a staff job.
You got in there, you mean more permanently?
Staff job. Oh,
is that what you mean?
A pension.
Yeah.
I still have a pension from the Irish Times. It's insane stuff. An incredible deal. Fantastic money, 4.5 days a week. A pension that can't sack you unless you, whatever, no matter what you do. Unbelievable kind of job. A job for life. Kind of carry on. Anyway, so the only reason I took that was because I didn't really see that I had any option. But secondly, I thought that probably from a position of strength, I could redesign myself backwards. I thought then if I was in that position, I might be able to redesign myself back into a job share or working as a sub-editor or something. And I was wrong in that, because again, it's to do with perception. People saw me as this thrusting young. For them, I was very young doing this, so I wasn't. I was 30. I was over 30. But I was this, the new thing, the latest thing, the thing that wants to, la la la. But of course, I didn't see the ladder at all, and I just wasn't interested in it. So I went in there, and I was in there for I suppose about 5 years. Yeah.
Okay.
And it was something I would have really liked to have done for a year or two.
So when you go around, you were this rising star, and it was coming good for you, basically. Well, career-wise.
Yeah, but
on paper, it would look like.
On paper, yeah, but I really was very. I was always very. I disowned.
Yeah.
That, because it just wasn't me. It's ultimately, it felt like sort of like if. Like a gay person coming out or whatever. I'm just not that person, you know? I'm not that person, I can't be that person. So I always had that kind of distance between me and that position. Because it was actually a prominent position, a public position, but the other thing was that I was immensely grateful, and I was also humbled, and I also had a sense of incredible duty towards the arts community. So, I never for one day took it lightly. So I won't say that. I worked very, very hard. But it's not me. But if I had 10 lives, it'd be fine, it'd be great. Because it was a bit like being at a party. It wasn't hard. You went in, you did your bit. And also, I like having ideas. So, that's what I'm good at. And also, I'm organised. And I don't actually value that management. I hate management, but I'm not good at managing people. But I am because I don't like to take leadership position, But at the same time, I am good at managing time. So my stuff was always done very efficiently and everything like that, But that gave me a kind of a grim satisfaction, The fact that it was all done and I went home, gave me a grim satisfaction. I'd hate to think that would have been my life. So then you say you're moving on. Then I met Eamon. I'll tell you about that as well. But then, so then the whole sort of fictionalization of my leaving the Irish Times is that, from depending on your place on the political spectrum, it's like, I think a woman's place is in the home, or I couldn't manage, I couldn't cope, with having a child and having my job. No, I didn't want to be there.
So you mean there was was there a false narrative around?
Utterly.
Really? And where was that circulated?
Because
where was that talked about?
Everywhere. Because,
really?
Because you see, just before I left, I started writing opinions. So this is where the opinion thing came from. Because really, I am a polemicist. So I started writing opinion because I couldn't believe the whole business about having children. I just couldn't believe, for instance, that there wasn't enough leave that you could breastfeed your baby, enough that the World Health Organization says you must. I mean, I couldn't believe the fact that actually many of the people I worked with didn't believe in maternity leave. They actually didn't believe that I was doing anything.
So you think that there was a devaluing of
utterly,
being a mother?
Utterly. I mean, no, complete.
Okay.
I mean, so...
And that was one of your themes that was kind of hijacked.
That's still huge.
And it's like, Victoria's only looking for this devil era kind of Ireland or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some people might say that. I mean, they're very stupid people, but I mean, like, let them at it.
I know, that's it.
Yeah.
And I want to flesh that out a bit because it's not accurate.
No, I've got no... I mean, for a start, I've got nothing to say about anybody else, in terms of...
No, you're not a judgmental person.
No, well, I mean, no, for a start, I did not give up my job because I felt I should be at home with my children.
I get you.
I gave up my job because I got the opportunity to not be there. Like, I didn't want to be there. Like, I don't think an office is a great place to be. I prefer to be at home. I mean, I don't think that's the
well,
most people agree. In fact, and definitely a majority of mothers would do the same thing. Women would do the same thing.
Most people agree, but in the Irish Times, you're not allowed to think like that.
Well, at the time, particularly, I mean, remember that really, my mentors, the Caroline Walshes, but she was always very open-minded, but they were the women's movement. I mean, Caroline had been a very young member of the women's movement, and I mean, we're talking the people who actually did things like, now admittedly these things were coming anyway, but these guys forced things like equal pay, maternity leave that I had. I mean, they forced the change whereby they had an option to be in the workforce, and they were very determined to stay there, and they were very determined that their revolution should not be overturned. And I mean, the Mary Hollands of this world, amazing people, but really bigoted on this one tiny point, amazing on, and I am too, bigoted in my own way, I'm sure, looked at for a younger woman. So it's part of, like, as even the spare rib Rosie Boycott said, they actually didn't think about mothers at all,
Wow.
because it was a time, they were coming out of a time, remember, where when they were being brought up, I mean, women had no choice even about whether they had children or not, so so the chosen children, which are the majority of children in middle class white Ireland, and also child psychology had not been even heard of when these women were being brought up. Yeah. So and then there was a whole Catholic thing which completely just gets tangled up in the whole thing, has nothing to do with anything.
You mentioned the child psychology because it's now shown that it's good to be with children, or what? What do you mean? Is that what you're...
I mean, the importance of the first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years is now is 100% clear. I mean, like in the old days, if you don't remember it, then, and if they're not talking, they're not people. I mean, you're going back to a point where at one point, before Christianity, they had no souls. The thing is, I considered, once I had a child, no, I won't say immediately I had a baby, but once I had a 1-year-old, I realised the incredible enjoyment, but also the world that was, the incredible experience, but also the importance of it minute by minute. And I suppose I did reach a point whereby I always wondered why the person minding my son Jack was earning less than me. Because it was much harder, clearly, and far more important. I mean, I was just doing bullshit stuff. I get you. But what is that about? What is it about? Yeah. Secondly, then when I had my second children,
because I had twins, I had a chance to experience then a toddler, a 2-year-old, and it was fantastic. And I remember just cycling up to the park with my son in the back and him saying thank you for the park, and I just loved it. And I mean, I loved when I was off, and I got a chance to, for a start, be at home, be in my community, be close to nature, which is very important to me. Like the office in the Irish Times was right in the centre of town, strip lighting, no light, couldn't stand it. I loved being able to just go with the rhythm of the day. I loved being able to go to the park. I loved being able to go to the local library. I loved just being with them. I loved, the light dying and me being at home with them. And I mean, like, it was an incredible, fantastic, and when my children were small, was the happiest time of my life, I know, but the other thing I have to say, I think that's a very valid choice. However, I do believe it must be a choice, because if you're not happy to be there, you're better off not being there. I've got no issue with, my mother, as I said, was a very bad mother. I had a childminder, and she probably taught me how to be a mother, because I don't know how those I'd have known. And she was there, and she was amazing. And so I am somebody who does not believe that it's good for somebody this idea that it must be the mother, I just don't buy that,
It must be the mother as opposed to the father.
Oh, I don't give a shit. I think.
But you think that do you think there's too much of a move away from?
Well, it's idea. Why on earth would you decide that 50% of mothers and 50% of fathers should do anything? Clearly, look at if you've got a brain and a science, any respect for evidence, regard the fact that more women are orientated towards the care of young children than men. And unless you are prepared to ignore every evidence from every society in the world, but why is that a problem? Why is that a problem? There's no reason for that to be a problem.
I agree with
the problem is basically that we've decided to downgrade that role. But it isn't, but the other side of that is that we must respect diversity, whereby even if 95% of children are cared for by women, if 5% are cared for by men, we need to have the brains and ability to actually completely respect the man doing it, whatever, as well, and the woman who's not doing it, I mean, that's much harder than this business of it should be equally divided. I mean, if you look at the European Union's stuff on childcare, it's bloody always men with bloody babies on their front and back, I know, because that's a positive image in their view, while a woman with a child is not a positive image. Except the fact is that nearly all young children are cared for by women. Nearly all young children are cared for by women everywhere in the world.
You're sounding like Jordan Peterson here, and we mentioned that in the email there. So.
Well, I suppose the fact
I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
I do believe that there is such a thing as it's not a question of I believe there's such a thing as gender.
I know, it's a fact.
It's a fact. Yeah. It's a fact. But the point is, what's very important is we don't prescribe on the basis of gender. That's what's important. But we respect diversity when it appears. But no, we shouldn't prescribe at all. If you want to be a pilot, you're a woman, you want to be a pilot, and you want your children to be cared for by your partner or by a nanny, go for it. I don't give a shit. But
you don't want to be told, Victoria, it's your duty as a modern woman to go and work and leave your children at home with someone else.
No, but
that's not fair.
Effectively, that's what we are doing.
Yes.
Because sadly, and it's partly our own fault in the sense that, understandably, there was a rush into the workforce. Totally understandably. But when you look back at a lot of this, you realise, I looked back at this and I had to disentangle all of this. It was part and parcel of Thatcherism as well, what I regard as being also positive and, greeny and kind of lefty and everything, all women being off being professors and da-da-da-da. I used to write articles in the Irish Times which were, women take over X, Y and Z, sector. Women museum directors, women, I wrote, Caroline Walsh, as I said, was central to the women's movement. I wrote those articles. I wrote an article in which the second commission of the status of women was 1993. They were given, Charles Haughey gave them the one central task. They needed to look at the place of women in the home, because most of the submissions, they'd had 600 submissions on that subject, on the subject of a payment to women in the home. the second commission came out with the deliberation that a payment that the service of a woman in the home, though of value to society, is primarily a benefit to the earning spouse, and therefore does not merit a state payment.
Wow.
So I wrote an article on the second commission whereby I actually, with approval, quoted that. I quoted that with approval. So that's where I was coming from. That's how, and so part of what...
So that was saying that she's making...
that she's working for her husband.
For her husband.
So in other words, it completely... You notice,
but not for society.
No, because the children are invisible. Because you notice in women, in people of that generation, they don't see the children because children weren't part of the landscape when they were growing up. I mean, they try, you know, like say someone like Nell McCafferty, who I spent 5 hours interviewing, and I adore. I actually love Nell McCafferty. She, the journalist Nell McCafferty, she, you know, she talks about sorting the knickers drawer. They always talk about the knickers drawer, and a woman has got more in her life than sorting the knickers drawer. They always talk about the knickers drawer. It's nothing to do with the knickers drawer. It's rearing the next generation. I mean, and the research is emphatic that, fairly emphatic that you need one-to-one care at least for the first 2 years. It's utterly emphatic that you should not, I mean, in terms of creche care, that our state research says more than 32 hours of creche care is damaging to young children a week. And yet our state is funding 45 hours. Yeah. But I mean... That's
a complete contradiction.
Well, I mean, I just think, where are the class actions of the future? I mean, we talk about the Magdalen laundries, blah, 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 you know. Like, the fact is, we know this damages children and we do it anyway.
And we're institutionalising them again, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, I am against...
sense.
I mean, what I will say is, and this is controversial and difficult, I am against creche care for children under 3. So, now I booked my children into creches and I didn't use them. At the end of the day, I don't believe that, I mean, it can work when you have got a situation where it's almost like a cottage industry and there's a one-to-one relationship of minder to child. But the fact is that the regulations around creches don't engage with the issue of the relationship between carers at all. They're all to do with whether the carpet is knobbly or, you know.
Yeah, so maybe a better way to do it would be having an au pair or first of all, the best case scenario, you have the
3
luxury.
years at home.
Yes, you've
Germany,
luxury.
I mean, countries all over the world.
Is that what they do?
Absolutely. I mean, they do it in Austria, they do it in, I mean, multiple European countries. Finland.
Well, supposing the woman doesn't want to stay at home,
or
the father. Okay.
Then you have the first 2 years at least. You have, and like they have in Denmark, they have a thing called a day mother. They call a tagamutter, whereby it's a childminder vetted, you know, trained, blah 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 blah, everything like that. But it's a childminder, and they have also got centres for the childminders to go to, whereby they get in socialisation. Ultimately, more Irish people prefer childminders to creches. Childminder is fantastic. It's just stand-in mother.
So what are they doing? Why are they doing the creche thing?
Because
it
is easier to regulate.
Pay for, is it? Or regulate?
It's easier to regulate. It's also that maybe, now there's a book called Children First by Penelope Leach, which is certainly, for me, it was my manifesto. And she actually thinks that we have got an instinctive worry about leaving the care of infants to other people, and that it's easier for us to part with them to an institution.
Wow.
In some ways, we're managing to, but salt away our feelings by the idea that an institution is caring for them, rather than that you're handing it to another person like yourself.
Okay.
So that's what she says. Penelope Leach is one of the best known child psychologists in this part of the world.
We have that instinct, but it's not correct.
She says you never see a picture of a creche that's advertising a creche with cots. You only ever see them with little tubby chairs and preschoolers where preschool is appropriate. You know, it's fine for a kid to go to preschool. The reason you don't see the cots is because we know that a line of cots is not right. I mean, 3 babies per person when they're under 1. I mean, 6 babies. I mean, that's like, it's insane. And that's why there's now a huge hullabaloo about insurance for crashes and stuff. Because they can't insure them because it's so uninsurable.
Well, I'm fascinated by the American South, or the particular phenomenon in the American South of, well, first of all, gender roles are far more, traditional gender roles are far more present. And what was completely new to me was homeschooling.
Yes.
Practically completely new. And that's very, very widespread. So,
yeah,
like,
that's the opposite.
people are the exact opposite. So people are afraid of,
well, I think they're
kind of paranoid about the state, basically.
But that's terrible.
And the government. Well, they have their own justification.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
And they teach their own kids, and in many cases it's wonderful. And you have the closest families, and families migrate all over the place, but they stick together like a glove on a hand, and it's beautiful. But you have to wonder about some of the parents.
Yeah.
Are they qualified to teach the kids? Like, there was I'm not saying this. This is just purely anecdotal, and I'm not having a stance. But I just met a fella there like a few weeks ago, and I was asking him about. He said he was in homeschool, and he basically does everything himself, and the mum, like, they do it online. But I just wonder, is there any real education going on there?
Are they being vetted or whatever? Because in
supposedly
Ireland
there's some bodies, and they do their SATs, but like.
Well, I actually think it's sad. I think we should have.
But all I was saying is there's far more home folk. Exactly.
And by contrast, there's less though. At the same time, I suppose the thing is because the system is less forgiving in the sense that there is less leave. There's less.
Yes,
I mean, women are more present in the workforce in America than they are here. They're certainly. I mean, what's very interesting is
it's kind of cutthroat, isn't it?
But this is the fascinating. Like, talk about the statistics that are just bullshit. Like, people go on and on and on about the gender pay gap. Now, interesting. Countries with a narrow gender pay gap are the least progressive, typically, very often. Because why? When you give women a chance to take time off, take part time off. That's what they do. So, say the countries, the Swedens, the Germanys, whatever, have wide gender pay gaps. America, much smaller gender pay gap, and us much smaller, because actually we're not closer to the American thing, but we're certainly between the two. But also in America, what choice do you have? You've got to work, Also,
the state's not going to have to.
No, and black women have much higher representation in the workforce than white women. Not surprising. Because when people get an option not to, when there's an earning male who can support you, much less likely in black society, and are we saying that that's because they're liberated? I don't think so. So all of this is all really not,
So it's not quite.
But I can say that 5 million times. I can say 5 million times the country in Europe with the smallest gender pay gap is Romania. Okay, is Romania, but that doesn't go there.
No one seems to be. Again, I don't want to implicate you, or not. That's the wrong word. I don't want to tie you in with a certain ideology and paint you with a brush. But the only very few people who say the kind of things that you say and that you're saying to me now in the public eye, one of them is John Waters, and he says other things too, but he's been completely annihilated. And
I think he's fabulous.
And many other people with. And I spoke with this to Lisa Hand yesterday. I have a theory myself that we don't tolerate moderate conservatism in Ireland. And as a result, the conservative people get angry, they go underground.
I'm not conservative.
I know, but just hear me out. They ferment, and then they go radical, and then they emerge in the manifestations of. Or it bottles up and it kind of explodes. It kind of explodes with these points like Peter Casey, and there's this shock. And the other cases with your one Gemma O'Doherty.
Oh Jesus. Listen,
so my point being, in America there is a discussion between the Conservatives and the Liberals, roughly speaking, the left and the right, blah blah blah. In England, you have the Conservatives and you have Labour, a genuine ideological difference, and they're kind of fighting it out, and we get some sort of compromise in between. I do not think we have that battle in Ireland.
No,
and there's no room for it.
Well,
There's,
that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, ultimately
but things like you're saying, there's no team backing you. You're not on a side. Not that you should be on a side, really.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, you'd be surprised. For a start, like, I am not a conservative.
Fine.
I am absolutely not a conservative.
Fine.
If I work with refugees, I would.
But conservatives can do that too.
Yeah, I mean, but I'm not conservative on any front at all.
Fine.
The opposite. Oh, also, like, if you want to, the idea that work in the home is as valuable as any other work, is fully implementable within a green agenda.
I was going to say green. Go on.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Because, like, the fact is, like, I mean, I only managed to kind of put these ideas into the green agenda rather than the green agenda suggested them. But I was kind of relieved to find a philosophical mainframe whereby, because I am a left-winger, you know, so the fact is that the point is the whole idea of guaranteed basic income, the whole idea of the importance, for instance, of a basic thing like breastfeeding. In some countries, they would actually in a green agenda, you would actually put an economic value on untraded aspects.
It's holistic.
The only thing that's wrong with caring for a child in your own home is that you don't pay tax on it. So it's considered perfectly legitimate if your child goes across the road and if that child comes to you, and then it's a trade and you can pay tax on it, or else if you killed your child and sold the meat, that would be a business, okay? But, like, the fact is that it's on something that is not seen and not traded, then it's not considered to be an economic value. Whereas, in fact, I believe that economy is much wider, and there's a great book called by a woman called Marilyn Waring.
Okay.
Called If Women Counted. I mean, it's the same in Africa. The women produce the food, but the World Bank said they don't know how to count that work. So, I mean, ultimately, it's just that what was traditionally women's work was not counted. That's all it's about. It's just about an economic accounting system. Okay. Finola Kennedy wrote a book From Cottage to Crèche. She's an economist. She has identified all of this. She wrote a minority report to the Second Commission on the Status of Women. So the fact is that the traditional accounting system doesn't count things like happiness. We're talking about looking at a happiness index, not looking at GNP.
You sound like Andrew Yang here. Do you like him?
Don't know.
Okay, sorry, go on.
So, no, ultimately this is mainstream green thinking.
Yes.
And there's no place in mainstream green thinking for everybody needs to work 10 hours a day and you know, that's overproduction. Think of the impact even on the planet of that level of work. Think of the impact on society of the fact that people have no time to think, no time to sing, no time to party, no time to love, no time, you know.
Yes.
I think so ultimately, I mean, my thought processes here do really, by chance, they absolutely are consistent with a green ideology. Yeah.
Tell me about, I suppose we're kind of talking about it, but
Yeah.
I asked you in my kind of preliminary abrasive email. I asked you about you want to green the face of feminism. I think that's what you're saying.
Yeah, I did write that a long time ago.
So
but
what's that about?
That's what this is about. Actually, what I'm talking about is how can you have? I mean, intelligent thinkers would be asking these questions. But in Ireland, we're very backward on all of that because we came to it later. We're still in the, you want everyone to, go to mass every day, and you're going to Devil Airs Ireland, blah, 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 and a story, etc., etc. My only advantage is I'm not a Catholic, so they kind of go, you're just a Catholic, and they go, oh dear, oh no, you're not a Catholic, oh dear, what are we going to do? We better, we have to listen to you.
That to you.
We have to listen to you. Well, I mean, look, people on radio shows sometimes, you can ask your dad. Some people ringing in, some people writing to me, emailing me. One time I was on Marion Finucane. Yeah, I mean, I am a feminist, so but I was on Marion Finucane once, okay, and I'd done because I wrote a book on motherhood in Ireland called Mother Ireland, and I was on Marion Finucane, and the researcher had spoke to me, and it was all a voice of barely suppressed kind of derision as she was speaking to me, and it was all this stuff about giving up my job, blah, blah, blah. And I spoke to her, I told her some of the things I've told you. Anyway, then I'm on Marion Finucane, a major broadcaster, and she asks me, so you believe only a woman can can care for a child, it's in her natural place in society or whatever. And I, in the middle of the national broadcaster of the country listening, I had to say, well, no, I don't think that at all. What an embarrassment. And the awful thing was there was a man who was rearing his own children who was on the phone who was ready to tackle me, okay?
It's
and
strange.
He had to be told to turn around, you know?
Well, that's brilliant.
And so anyway, a sociologist who was on with me said, no, it's all very simple. Catherine Hackham, the economist, has shown this. Women who are domestically orientated, there's women who are in between, and there's women who are workers. Victoria is a domestically orientated woman. As I said, it was like, you know, I'm like a what do you say, a Rhode Island Red type of hen, you know what I mean? Like, I'm that kind of woman. And, you know, I just...
What did you think of that classification from the sociologist?
Ridiculous. I mean, I know. I think there's something in Catherine Hackham says. She's great in that she's a London School of Economics economist who says a lot of this, you know? She says, for instance, many things. One, notice that the number of women in the workplace is broadly similar across many countries regardless of the childcare infrastructure, okay? Because women, it's the preference theory. Women tend to do what they prefer to do. Interestingly, what they want to do in their teens, whatever, they usually end up doing. Women prefer downshifted jobs. Many of them prefer to stay home for some years. Every statistic, every survey shows you that women, particularly mothers, but not only just mothers, like to stay home for a few years and like to work part-time. I think lots of people want to work part-time. Women in Western society, certainly in Ireland, earn more than men in their 20s.
Really?
Yes, and then the gender pay gap is largely accounted for by the fact that women take time out of the workforce. The question we have to ask are lots of questions. One, why ageism? Why can people then not return to the workforce as if what they've been doing has been nothing, which is nonsense. The other thing is that we cannot impoverish people because they have been caring in their old age. And the very serious issue, like if my marriage broke up, I wouldn't have a pension. I would have, you know, I mean, like that's not a funny situation.
No.
Yeah.
Well, can we go back to where my question began, and it was a bad question, but I loved your answer.
Right.
Even though we never got to the answer of my question, which was, tell me about your meeting with Eamon.
Oh, right, okay.
Your husband, who is the leader of the Irish Green Party. Let's just not...
Yeah, no, well, I was...
Did you get into green stuff before you met him, by the way?
No, but no, I'll tell you why.
I suppose it didn't exist, did it?
Yes.
Did it?
I mean, some of my schoolmates voted for the Ecological Party, which it was, and my mother, remember, was a natural green. I mean, I grew up in an astonishing garden, and, you know... Anyway, my mother, you know, and my mother, low church Protestant, with a lot of green stuff going on, and so... But the reason I didn't vote Green in national elections was because I saw Christopher Fettis, who founded the Green Party, on the television saying most Greens would prefer to be playing the piano rather than to be in politics. And I thought, get up the yard. I thought, yeah, exactly. And I thought, well, feck that, you know. And so I voted for left-wing candidates in national elections and Greens in I voted for the Labour. My family would have been a Labour Party, so I'd have voted.
Wouldn't they have been telling women to reject their motherhood like?
So would I have. I mean, at the end of the day, but I mean, the Labour Party had a manifesto with the first 3 years of maternity leave. Yeah,
okay, fair enough.
Cherishing our children, Ethna Fitzgerald, fair play to her. So I probably would have voted for Garrett Fitzgerald's women in Dún Laoghaire at one point because of the women thing. But other than that, no, I would have been voting left wing, but I would have then I would have voted in local elections for Greens. So anyway, yes, I met my husband at a dancing class, and I guess we were probably both fairly desperate to meet somebody. I mean, we were both in our 30s. We both wanted children, and you know, you got to meet someone if you want children, you know. And I think that we're probably a bit delayed in all of this by the economic situation in the 80s, which kept people in a kind of perpetual singledom kind of thing, because really we didn't have the tools to...
Didn't he leave to... He went all over the place.
Yes, and so did I. And we both came back at the same time, determined to stay in Ireland as almost a political... And we both made our own jobs, whereby he started a company and I became a freelance. And we met much later. And we met at the Piper's Club in Henrietta Street. And I was dancing with one of I didn't immediately took a aversion to him because he's very good looking, and I immediately thought, oh, like he'll be big into himself. He also looks a bit like a rugby player. I don't like.
He's a big tall
big,
yeah,
thick neck people. I don't. So anyway, I was dancing around with one guy, kind of I thought was quite attractive, because certainly I was definitely on the lookout, and time was short, like, and I said. He turned out to be as thick as a plank. So anyway, I turned around and I was dancing with Eamon, and I said, oh, why do the women all always dance together but the men won't dance with each other? And Eamon said, oh, it's decades of conditioning. And I thought, oh my God, there's a presence of a brain here, you know, like, and I know that sounds awful, but then anyway, we went to the pub that night, and immediately we had, like, our score sheets was tick, 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 tick. He was living in the Liberties, I was living in the Liberties, I was playing the mandolin, he was playing the violin. As it happens, in Ireland, Dublin, we knew people, loads of people in common. The next time we met was at a peace march. So ultimately,
Lovely.
I immediately knew that this was definitely this was going to work. Yeah. Immediately knew that.
Deadly.
And
well, you know,
dance. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, plenty of difficulties along the way. I tell you, no rosy bed of roses, but so anyway, so Eamon on one of the second day or whatever said that if he ever had children, he thought both parents should work part-time. Oh, what a joke that has been, I must say. He works like at least a job and a half, if not 2 jobs, and you know, that's been the case right from the beginning.
One thing I noticed about your family, and I admire it incredibly, is there's the professional element, and there's also a lovely hospitality and genuine community concern that we were talking about earlier, actually.
Yeah.
And well, I suppose that forms your professions in a sense. Because the automatic picture of a profession is self-interested, maybe, or it can't. Not that it's self-interested, but do you know what I'm saying? You're both empathetic, generous people, while still being very successful in your own rights.
I guess so, but I would consider that completely normal, and actually the two things are completely necessary to each other.
Yeah, but when I come to your house, it's a warm, homely home.
Don't you think that's what most houses you go into in Dublin are like?
Maybe they are, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, like, I as I said...
But it's great.
Yes, it is great. And I mean, like, as I said,
And you cleaned the daughter, for God's sake.
Yes, and this
wonderful.
week I've just been at a very tragic event, as I've said, that whereby the 19-year-old son of a friend from across the road has died, and we went to the funeral, and every single person from his primary school was up there, and he cleaned the daughter with his family. His family sang, played, and even in this grief, their door is open, and my door is open, and I do think that there is a great sense of community.
I will say, actually, I don't know that I agree with you on other homes in Dublin, to be honest. I do think your house is special. I don't think that your level of community engagement and involvement...
Well, partly that's because I have time.
Yeah, but Eamon too. Like, anyway, go on.
Yeah, I mean, partly that's because although, look, I am, I am very busy. I mean, I have a child with special needs. He comes home at 3 o'clock. So from 3 o'clock, I'm on home duties every day. And, I'm not saying that sometimes that's a pain in the arse, but sometimes I would just love to have the whole day to work. But actually, really, till 3 o'clock is enough for most people, particularly as it gets dark in Ireland in the winter at 4 o'clock. And I really am not going to work after it gets dark.
Yeah.
But the thing is that I have time to engage with my community and to make home in the broadest sense. And I gain huge satisfaction from that. Huge. And I think that and something like the death of a child like this.
Yes.
A young man. 19,
was he?
Yes. I mean, an incredible young man, which is devastating and, of course, utterly devastating for his family. But if anything, it has taught us one thing, is that we have an incredible community. But the other thing is that it's the community will get us through this, And I think we will. The fact that their door is open in grief, I think... And the singing, the dance, they have everything there. The singing, the day he died, they were meant to come to this house to sing carols around the piano. And the money that we normally raise goes to the local Vincent de Paul. But now people have donated and it's going in his name to the Vincent de Paul. I think the fact that their door is open, and I met that young boy 4 weeks ago cleaning the daughter.
Wow.
and his whole family would be out there cleaning the dollar. Like, this is, you're creating the bonds that actually will sustain you in
Tough
well,
times.
well, I won't say will get you through it, but might help you or throw you a
Yes.
lifeline in this most horrific of situations, you know.
Your family has set up some camps around the country in some sense as well. Not only in this community, like as I said, you go to Donegal every year, I think, and then also
In Ishboffin.
you have a fantastic relationship with Inishboffin,
Yeah.
I believe. So
Yeah,
can you
yeah.
tell me a little bit about your family trips around the place, and those communities that you've entered there too?
Yeah, and the reason that we like going to Inishboffin, really, which is an island off Galway, is well, it's spectacularly beautiful. So that's the start. But it's because there are no cars, or the people who come there are cars, but the people who come here don't use cars. Changes the environment whereby it's nucleated, to use Jack's word, whereby as a rural community, whereby once the ferry is gone, you're stuck with the people you're there with.
Yeah.
As
better or
people
for
would
worse.
have been in the past when they had no cars and there was not the opportunity of constant flight from your community. So you're stuck with the whatever Lantern George guy across the way, whatever. And so what happens is that they welcome us in, the locals welcome us in for better, for worse. I don't know how they manage it. But it's always the same people. So it's like, it's like an episode of a Dickens novel, whereby you arrive on the ferry and you see always the same people.
Really?
And then what happens is we're the last cottage on the beach. So people flush up our direction and
Really?
they end up outside the door. And you get people, I love it, because you get people from such completely different, they shouldn't ever, meet. They shouldn't meet, but they're outside our door having cups of tea and glass of wine. And that goes on all day long, and everyone's going to the same place because there is only going to be a certain number of places you can go. So it's really the way it should a rural community can function,
Is it true Damien Dempsey is out there?
Yes. Oh yeah. I mean, look, there's
What
lots
sorts of people? Are
Also,
there anyone-
Mark Durkin, the ex-leader of the SDLP, he would be down there.
Okay.
Um,
And
you
what-
know,
why
endless numbers of people.
Boffin, or why did you end up there? Or
I
how?
was the first holiday. I went with my husband with my son Jack. When it was our first holiday as a family, we went, and it was the place that neither of us had a very. We got married in West Cork,
Okay.
so and my mother was from Donegal, so we both have strong family associations with certain parts of the world. But this is a place where neither of us had that strong association, so it was a neutral meeting point. And we met on our way out. The first time we went out, we met somebody who said something about renting us a small cottage, and so it's a cottage literally on the beach.
Okay.
Literally, it's on the beach, and it's the most stunning view I've ever seen anywhere in my entire life.
So you fell in love with the place.
Yeah, and I mean it's the utter simplicity whereby the main thing is that you can't get in a car and drive away. That is the key thing,
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
I was saying to Mum, I was embarrassed the other day because I think it was Tuesday night. I was walking through Dublin on Nassau Street and I was freezing cold and the rain was kind of spattering and I felt uncomfortable being out in the elements because in Alabama I get
Yeah.
into my car,
Oh wow.
I drive everywhere,
Yeah.
I walk maybe 50 metres to a class, get back in the car, drive to the next place, and I'm not at all mixing with my actual environment.
And that's because
my actual habitat. I'm not facing the waves or whatever, and it's very sad.
Yeah, and you want to watch it because if you're, I mean, I know old people, Americans who won't, they can't. I mean, a friend of mine lives in Bray and her American father can't come visit her because he has to walk into the village, whatever. But it's an incredible thing to have. I mean, to not have a car, to not be getting in a car changes everything about your relationship with your
it's like,
environment.
Did you read John Waters' book, Give Us Back the Bad Roads?
No.
Anyway, he talks about this whole thing where we've lost our ability to work with our hands and to feel the bumps on the bad roads, for example.
Yeah.
And we have if we are doing that, we are conscious of where we are and where we're going
but I'm a
and
bit
what
like
we're
that.
doing.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I like say my
Instead
first
of
trip,
going on the bloody motorway and just
well,
zipping
I can't
over.
stand. I mean, I can't stand motorways. I actually
It's soul destroying.
I'm scared to drive on them. So
awful.
like I also really hate flying. So
Really?
the thing, yeah, I do. I really hate it. So that's a problem, you know. But
Yeah.
but at the same time, when you talk about America, I mean, I'm not interested because America is a flight away, and so if I can get, I mean, my first journey was a train. I got the train to Istanbul when I was 18 or whatever, and you know, I got that right through the former Eastern Europe, all that kind of stuff, and it was my ticket said Connolly, Izmir, and so for me, like, I like to travel overland, and
You have a sense of where you're going.
well, I have a sense of that, and so that's very important to me. But most people don't feel those things. They, you know, and so probably I don't know what is related.
You go into McDonald's.
Yeah, well, I mean, then just the world just becomes all the same. You know,
Exactly.
it doesn't mean anything to me. You know, so
Which happens all over America, and that upsets me a lot.
Yeah.
All these towns, you don't go downtown because it's dead. Because all
that's
the
why I'm not
business,
interested in America. I mean,
all
like,
the businesses
too many
out
cars.
on all the businesses out on the highways, and it's all the same businesses over and over and over
I
again.
know. Yeah.
Anyway,
Go. Yeah.
last thing I want to ask you about the Inishbofin you just talked about, but what about Dunlewy? What's the difference? Are the people a completely different ballgame up there?
Oh God, yes. Well, Dunlewy, I started going there as a small child. I went with because I was an only girl. I went with an only boy, and was a friend. I was sent off with everybody. I would go anywhere because I was the singleton child, and I would eat anything, and I went everywhere and I didn't care. So I was always brought off to sort of encourage other children, and so off I went, and there's 2 lakes underneath Mount Errigal, and then when I went there, I didn't have a sense that there was anywhere else that you could leave it and go. I didn't know where it was, but it was, and when I went there, I actually went and got milk in a pail from the weavers. There were 3 weavers. They were like about 10 foot tall, they looked like, and they were weaving, and there was a dog underneath the table, and they were throwing bones to the dog. And everything was written in Irish when you went. So that made me feel like I was in a really, I was a little bit scared by that.
Okay.
You know? I was really in a very different place, and the colour of the sand was orange, you know, and I mean, it's an incredibly beautiful part of the world. Also quite sinister in a sense, and it's a Glendalough Valley, but without the commercialisation.
Yes.
So, but I mean, as a child, I didn't know. I just thought that I didn't know how it connected to anywhere. So I never went back. So it would stay lodged in my mind, but I never went back there until much later, probably when I was about 30, and I went back there, and I began going to partly at the time I met Eamon, I got into the Irish language. I mean, I'm a linguist, I love languages. Irish language, and then the singing, I love the singing, all that stuff. And I liked the people who were involved in all of that much more than I liked the people who were in the art scene in Dublin. Who I felt were just, well, they tend to be not engaged, you know, tend to be, it was all about the latest Polish film, whatever. It's all about them. Politically engaged and environmentally conscious and I suppose socially conscious. It might sound a bit boring to me, like, you know, but like, that's me, you know, so what can I do? So anyway, I was really into all of that, and really at the end of the day, it's through all of that I met Eamon, because I was a woman invited me to go set dancing, and that's how all that happened. So the Donegal was part of that, and I went up to see the band Alton playing the last time they played, because Frankie Kennedy died, the flute player, and then they did the Frankie Kennedy Winter School. And so I've been going, I went every single year, including years that it was snowing. Amazing. Like, you go up and you couldn't go anywhere once you arrived because it was snowing.
Exactly.
And all you got was things like, I remember the fiddle player Martin Hayes playing for 3 hours in the snow on New Year's Day. I mean,
we went up, when we saw you, it was Paddy Glacken and Donald Lunn.
Oh yeah.
That was probably about 5 years ago.
I mean, whereby you're actually, you know, if you love music, you're actually getting to sit right beside, listen to, you know, Liam O'Malley singing, you know, Carrick Ferguson Irish. I mean, so for me, it's like, it is pilgrimage. And it's a pilgrimage, and New Year's Eve is underneath Errigal, and underneath the stars, whereby, you know, it's the eternal verities, if you like. And so I've done that for like, 25 years. And I
Wow.
hope I will never stop. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you said when we first were in touch, you said, I'm not around between the 20-something and the second
That's
trainer or
27
something.
and the first, yeah. And
Because you'll be in Donegal.
I used to fight. I fought for it every single year I worked in the Irish Times. I managed it every year with lots of lots of reporting from Donegal to fill the pages, like about 4 times bigger than the normal review, you know, that kind of stuff. So
You wouldn't
anyway,
get that in America. That time off.
yeah. Oh well, I wouldn't. Yeah. Well, yeah. Forget about America. I mean,
As a college professor, you would. They get.
I
months
know
and
that
months.
you're. You know.
It's
You're, I
ridiculous.
mean, I'm just crazy stuff. You know, like. Goodbye. I just, what are
You've
they?
no interest, it sounds like.
Well, I mean, two of my
In the
my
country.
best friend is American, and two of my very, very best friends are American.
Yeah.
Very best, living in the States. Yeah. So, I have much less interest in. I love them, and I love New York, because you can walk around New York, whatever. But I don't. It's the cars, and I just and it's this, and I have travelled a fair bit in the States, but I have. It is true. I have much less interest in the US than I have in Eurasia.
Very good. Well, on that note,
Yeah,
Victoria,
go for
I
it.
want to come back.
Go for it.
I want to come back another
Alright,
time.
okay.
Not today, but maybe next year. I really
Okay.
enjoyed that. So thank you.
Okay, good.
You are listening to the Logos broadcast with Fergus James Murphy.